The story begins with silence. Not the silence of peace, but that haunting quiet that fills the air after generations of thunder. The skies of the mid-20th century had seen legends rise and fall, propellers replaced by jets, sound barriers shattered, and empires redefined by the roar of engines. But among all the machines that ever carved their names into the clouds, two became immortal in very different ways. The sleek, roaring P-51 Mustang and the deadly Silver Arrow called the MiG-15. Separated by almost a decade of innovation, they were never meant to meet. The P-51 was the king of the piston age, a symbol of human mastery in the chaos of World War II. The MiG-15 was the vanguard of a new world, one powered by jet engines, speed, and the ruthless precision of the Cold War. And yet, fate, history, and imagination have forever linked their names in one impossible question. Could the old king of the skies ever defeat the new one? To understand that question, we must go back to the heart of both legends. The North American P-51 Mustang wasn't born out of perfection, it was born out of necessity. In 1940, when Britain stood alone against the Luftwaffe, they turned to America for help. The original Mustangs were average at best, fast but limited in range, strong but underpowered. Then came the marriage that changed history, the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. That single change transformed the Mustang into something transcendent. Suddenly, it could fly higher, faster, and farther than anything the Allies had. It could escort bombers deep into enemy territory and return home with fuel to spare. Pilots called it a dream with wings. The enemy called it a nightmare. The Mustang became the blade that cut the Luftwaffe to pieces. It could dive like a hawk, climb like a ghost, and turn with the grace of a dancer. By the war's end, the P-51 had destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft. But what truly made it legendary wasn't its kill count. It was the way it made its pilots feel. When you sat in that cockpit, you didn't feel like you were flying a machine. You felt like you had become one. But as the world celebrated peace, the sky was already changing. In laboratories across the Soviet Union and the United States, engineers were sculpting a new kind of bird, a creature without propellers, fueled by fire and speed. And in 1947, the Soviets unveiled their masterpiece, the MiG-15. It looked alien compared to anything that had flown before, swept wings, a shark-like nose, and a jet engine that could carry it beyond the limits of anything the P-51 had ever faced. It climbed faster, flew higher, and moved twice as fast. The MiG wasn't a fighter, it was a revolution. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, the MiG-15 appeared over the Yalu River like a silver phantom. It tore through the first generation of U.S. jets with ease and sent piston fighters into extinction, or so it seemed, because somewhere below that frozen sky, a few old Mustangs still fought. The Americans had deployed them for ground support and reconnaissance, never expecting them to face jets. They were relics in a jet age, outmatched in every measurable way. But air combat has never been just about machines. It's about men, reflexes, instincts, and courage. On paper, the P-51 had no chance. The MiG-15 could fly at 670 mph. The Mustang barely touched 440. The MiG could climb at more than twice the rate and could reach altitudes the Mustang could only dream of. Yet in the unpredictable theater of war, numbers have a way of lying. One cold morning in 1951, the impossible almost happened. A Mustang from the South African Air Force, part of the United Nations contingent in Korea, found itself hunted by a MiG-15. The Soviet-built jet dove in with terrifying speed, its cannon blazing. The Mustang twisted through the valleys, hugging the terrain where the jet couldn't follow. The MiG overshot, pulling up hard to avoid a crash, and for a split second, the P-51 was behind it. The pilot squeezed the trigger, and 50 caliber rounds arced through the air. The MiG escaped that day, but the myth was born, the day the old king had the new one in his sights. It was a glimpse of an impossible duel. a dream fight that would echo for decades among aviation historians and dreamers alike. Could skill, experience, and the soul of a pilot ever bridge the gap between propeller and jet? Could a P-51 actually destroy a MiG-15? Technically, perhaps not, but in the heart of every pilot who ever flew her, the Mustang was more than a machine. It was willpower made visible. And sometimes, in war, willpower is enough to rewrite physics. Even imagining such a duel is to understand the poetry of aviation itself, one fighter representing the end of one era, the other the beginning of another. One with wings that hummed, the other with engines that screamed. One that fought for freedom, the other for ideology. Both crafted by nations that believed the future belonged to whoever ruled the air. In the end, history separated them by time. But imagination brings them together again. Two predators circling above the clouds, one powered by pistons, the other by fire. The impossible dogfight had not yet begun. But its shadow stretched across decades of aviation lore, waiting for the day someone would dare to ask the question, and to imagine the answer, because the truth is, some battles are never fought in reality. They're fought in the minds of those who love the sky. The wind screamed at 20,000 feet. The Mustang climbed, its propeller slicing the thin air in a desperate ascent. In the distance, a silver glint flashed across the morning sky, a MiG-15 cutting through the heavens like a blade of light. The jet's exhaust burned bright, leaving a trail of smoke that shimmered in the cold. For a brief moment, both aircraft shared the same sky, one driven by pistons, the other by fire. Two generations of flight meeting in a moment that shouldn't exist. The MiG-15 was faster, without question. It could accelerate past the sound barrier's doorstep, leaving the Mustang far behind in level flight. But speed is only one piece of the equation. Air combat, real air combat, isn't a drag race. It's a chess match at 9 miles a minute. And the pilot who knows how to control the board, how to force his opponent into a mistake, can change everything. To understand why this battle captivates so many, we must look beyond the numbers. The MiG-15 was a product of post-war desperation and brilliance. Its design was influenced by captured German research, particularly the swept-wing technology of the Mi-262 jet. Soviet engineers, led by Artem Mikoyan and Mikhail Gurevich, turned those ideas into something terrifyingly effective. With a single turbojet engine and swept wings that reduced drag at high speeds, the MiG could climb to 40,000 feet in minutes. Its cannons, two 23mm and one 37mm, could shred any target with a single hit. The P-51 Mustang, on the other hand, represented a different kind of genius. It was an extension of instinct. Everything about its design was balanced: weight, lift, thrust, control. It wasn't just a fast airplane, it was a feeling. Pilots said that when you moved the stick, the Mustang thought with you. It responded instantly, almost as if it anticipated your next move. That harmony between man and machine made it deadly in the dogfights over Europe. But the MiG was from another world. Jet thrust replaced prop torque, acceleration replaced agility, altitude became an advantage the Mustang could no longer touch. So, could the old warhorse ever hope to take down the jet? In theory, only under very specific conditions. The MiG-15's swept-wing design made it unstable at low speeds and prone to compressibility issues in sharp dives. Below 5,000 feet, where air density thickened, its control surfaces stiffened and its turning radius widened. The Mustang, light and responsive, excelled there. If the Mustang could lure the MiG into a turning fight close to the ground, an unlikely but possible scenario, the tables could turn. In Korea, this wasn't just theory. It happened. On several occasions, P-51s found themselves under attack by MiG-15s during low-altitude missions. The MiGs dove in at incredible speed, firing quick bursts before shooting skyward again. But if they missed, and many did, they were forced to pull out of their dive before slamming into the terrain. And in that brief, fleeting moment of recovery, a skilled Mustang pilot could reverse the fight. There are reports, fragmented, uncertain, of MiGs damaged or even destroyed in such encounters, though official confirmations remain elusive. But every pilot who faced that situation remembers the same feeling, awe mixed with fear. The MiG moved like lightning. Its passes were so fast that the air itself seemed to split. Against such power, the Mustang felt almost ancient. Yet inside that cockpit, something primal awakened. The Mustang pilot wasn't relying on technology. He was relying on himself, his reflexes, his instincts, his courage. One American pilot described watching a MiG-15 streak past him in 1951. It wasn't like fighting another plane. It was like fighting a force of nature. It came out of nowhere, hit like thunder, and vanished into the sky. But when he overshot for just 1 second, I saw his weakness. He was too fast, too confident. That second, that tiny window of imperfection, was where the Mustang lived. The P-51's best defense against the MiG was its ability to maneuver at low speed and hug the terrain. It could fly through valleys, around hills, beneath clouds, where the jet's advantage vanished. A MiG pilot trying to follow would risk losing control. The Mustang pilot, in contrast, could use the landscape as both shield and weapon. In one story told among Korean War veterans, a Mustang from the 18th Fighter Bomber Wing was chased by a MiG through a mountain pass near the Yalu River. The jet fired again and again, but missed each time. The Mustang pilot, instead of running, slowed down, forcing the MiG to overshoot. As the Soviet-built fighter roared past, the P-51 rolled behind it, pulling into firing position for a split second before the MiG climbed away. The Mustang's guns blazed, and though the MiG escaped, the message was clear. Even the old could still bite. But beyond the tactics, there was something emotional about this confrontation, something almost poetic. The P-51 was the last breath of an era where the pilot and the plane were one, where skill and instinct defined victory. The MiG-15 was the first whisper of a new age, where machines began to surpass their masters. Their meeting wasn't just a clash of metal, it was a passing of the torch. The pilots who flew the MiG were proud, but they respected the Mustang. Many had grown up hearing stories of its victories in Europe, of how it had dominated the skies over Germany and Japan. Facing one was like meeting a legend. In their eyes, shooting down a Mustang wasn't just another kill, it was an honor. And for the Mustang pilots, seeing a MiG in the sky wasn't just fear, it was defiance. It was the refusal to be erased by time. They knew they couldn't match the speed, but they also knew that courage doesn't rust. That's why they kept flying missions, even when the odds were impossible. It's easy to look at this from a technical perspective, speed, climb rate, armament, but that misses the point. Because every generation of pilots carries the same fire. The machine changes, the sky remains, but courage is eternal. As the Korean War dragged on, jets began to dominate completely. The F-86 Sabre took the place of the P-51, finally giving the Americans a match for the MiG. But the stories of those early encounters, those impossible duels, never faded. They became part of aviation mythology, the dream of the last propeller fighter standing against the first great jet. And in that mythology, the fight never ends. The Silver Mustang still soars, engine roaring, chasing the ghost of a MiG through a sky that no longer exists. It's not about victory anymore, it's about legacy, about proving that even when the world moves on, some spirits refuse to be left behind. The dogfight remains impossible, but impossibility has never stopped humanity from dreaming. The horizon was painted in shades of gold and grey when it happened, dawn over the Korean peninsula. The air was thin, cold, and utterly still. The P-51 Mustang of Captain Thomas Reed sliced through a narrow valley, its Merlin engine growling like a restless predator. The mission was routine, recon over the river lines near the 38th parallel. But routine didn't exist in this sky. Every sound, every vibration could mean death. Reed was 26, a veteran of the last war. He had seen Messerschmitts burn over France, had watched the old world crumble beneath the roar of his propeller. But this was different. The enemies now flew with jets, silver phantoms that appeared and vanished faster than thought. Yet he stayed in the Mustang. He called it his ghost. "She and I," he once said, "we're too stubborn to die." He banked left, scanning the ridgeline. The radio crackled, faint and uncertain. Static filled the cockpit. Then, above the mountains, a glint, small, sharp, almost beautiful. Reed squinted, his gut twisted. It wasn't sunlight, it was metal. A MiG-15. The Soviet-built fighter dove from 30,000 feet like a falling comet. Its single jet engine howled across the thin air, trailing a pale flame. The Mustang's canopy trembled from the shockwave as the jet screamed past. Reed's instinct took over. He threw the throttle forward, the Merlin engine roaring to full power. The P-51 leapt ahead, slower but alive, raw, furious. "Come on, sweetheart," he muttered. "Dance with me one more time." The MiG climbed steeply, looped and came down again, a hunter toying with prey. Its pilot, Lieutenant Yuri Sokolov, was 23. To him, the war was fresh, mechanical, almost mathematical. His MiG was a weapon of the future, precise and unstoppable. He had studied the Mustang in books, seen the captured wrecks, heard the stories. Beautiful aircraft, they said, elegant, deadly in its time, but its time was over. Sokolov leveled out at 15,000 feet, eyes locked on the propeller-driven dot below. He throttled down slightly, closing in for the kill. The MiG's radar gun sight blinked, the distance shrank. Reed saw it coming. The sun caught the MiG's wings like fire. He yanked the Mustang into a hard turn, feeling the G-forces crush his chest. The old fighter groaned, metal straining, but it held. Bullets ripped past the canopy, tearing through the air like angry gods. The MiG overshot, moving too fast. For half a heartbeat, Reed had him. He rolled inverted, dove and pulled behind the jet as it climbed. The P-51's nose trembled with effort. He lined up the shot, too far, too steep, but he fired anyway. 6 .50-caliber Brownings erupted in unison, tracing golden lines into the morning sky. The rounds fell short, sparks vanishing into the void. The MiG banked left, engines shrieking, and disappeared into the glare. Reed exhaled. His heart was a hammer in his chest. The radio hissed again. "Mustang lead, you've got company, repeat, multiple bogies inbound from north." He didn't answer. There was no time. The MiG was coming back. Sokolov dove again, confident now. He could end this relic in seconds. His crosshairs flashed red. He fired. Tracer rounds ripped through the valley, slicing the air where the Mustang had been a moment earlier. But Reed wasn't there. He dropped the flaps, cutting speed instantly. The MiG roared past, overshooting once more. Reed pulled the stick, climbing into the MiG's wake, his teeth gritted from the G-force. The two aircraft danced an impossible ballet, one too fast for its own good, the other too old to quit. The Mustang's engine coughed, strained, but held. The MiG's turbojet screamed, its tail flame flickering as it pulled into a high loop. At 5,000 feet, the fight descended into the clouds. Visibility vanished, only instinct remained. Inside the MiG, Sokolov's instruments glowed red in the fog. He couldn't see the Mustang, but he could feel it. Somewhere below, the ghost was waiting. He cut throttle slightly, eyes darting across the dials, a glimmer of movement on his left. Too slow to be another jet. He rolled hard, firing blind. Nothing. Below, Reed caught a glimpse of silver slicing through the mist. He leveled out and dove beneath the clouds, skimming the treetops. The Mustang's wings brushed air so dense it felt like resistance. He knew the MiG couldn't follow. Not down here. But Sokolov was young and proud. He followed anyway. The jet tore through the clouds, its speed now a curse. The air grew heavy. The controls stiffened. The MiG's swept wings fought against the pressure, shuddering violently. In seconds it was no longer flying, it was falling. Reed saw it happen. The MiG dropped into view ahead of him, wobbling as its pilot struggled to pull up. The Mustang surged behind, engine howling, the nose steady. The crosshairs drifted over the MiG's tail. "Come on, hold it," Reed whispered. "Just a little closer." He fired. The .50 caliber guns erupted again, thunder in the valley, tracers stitched across the sky. Some vanished into the distance, others found their mark. A burst hit the MiG's right wing root. Smoke bloomed, thick and black. The jet shuddered, pitched upward, and for a moment it seemed to hang suspended against the dawn. Then it fell. Sokolov ejected, the canopy exploding into shards. His parachute bloomed like a white star above the smoke. The MiG spiraled into the mountainside, exploding in a fireball that echoed across the valley. Reed watched silently as debris rained down through the clouds. He didn't cheer. He didn't even smile. He just breathed, slow, deep, unbelieving. He looked at the instrument panel, fuel low, oil pressure warning. The Mustang was hurt, but she was alive. The radio crackled again. "Mustang lead, say position." Reed pressed the transmit key, voice calm, steady. "Still flying." He banked toward the rising sun, the light reflecting off the Mustang's battered wings. Somewhere behind him, the smoke from the MiG drifted into the clouds. The sky was quiet again, the kind of silence that carries weight. Later, no record of that kill would ever be confirmed. The official reports would list it as unverified contact. Some would say it was impossible, others would call it luck, but for Reed and for every pilot who ever loved the sky, it was something else entirely. It was proof that courage could still bridge the impossible. That even in a world ruled by speed and progress, there was still room for heart. The Mustang flew home that morning, its engines sputtering, wings trembling, paint scorched by battle. The mechanics who met it on the ground could hardly believe it had survived. Reed stepped out, touched the fuselage, and smiled softly. "Good girl," he whispered. "You're still the queen." That night, under the dim light of the hangar, the crew patched the holes, wiped the oil, and repainted the nose art. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of jets far away, symbols of a future that was already here. But for one day, in one forgotten valley, the past had won. The impossible dogfight had happened, and even if no one believed it, the sky remembered. When the roar fades, when the smoke clears, when the sky finally exhales, what remains? For Captain Thomas Reed, it was the hum of silence, the kind that presses against the ears and fills the spaces between memory and disbelief. His P-51 sat motionless on the tarmac, streaked with oil and dust. The sun was sinking, casting long shadows across the airfield. Mechanics worked around the plane in quiet awe, their movements slow, almost reverent. No one spoke of what they had heard on the radio. No one asked about the jet. Reed stood a few feet away, helmet in hand, eyes fixed on the Merlin engine that still ticked as it cooled. It was strange. The aircraft looked smaller now, fragile even, as if the fight had stripped away its legend and left only the truth. It was just metal, bolts, and willpower held together by faith. "Did you really do it?" someone finally asked. Reed didn't answer. He just looked at the horizon where the sky met the mountains. "I don't know," he said quietly. "Maybe I did. Maybe the sky just took pity on me." That night, the wind carried the faint echoes of that day across the base. Pilots traded whispers in the barracks. Some said Reed had shot down a MiG. Others said he'd been hallucinating from oxygen starvation. The official report would later call it unconfirmed, but to those who had seen the smoke over the valley, it didn't matter. Something extraordinary had happened out there, and everyone could feel it. War has always been as much about myth as it is about fact. Myths give men reason to keep fighting when the numbers say they shouldn't. The P-51 versus the MiG-15 became one of those myths, a story passed from pilot to pilot, growing with each retelling. In every version, the details changed. The valley grew narrower, the chase longer, the gunfire brighter, but the heart of it stayed the same. An old warhorse had defied the impossible. Reed didn't seek fame. He didn't write reports or grant interviews. He flew his remaining missions quietly, did his duty, and when his tour ended, he went home. For him, the war was over. But the sky never truly let go. Years later, long after the Korean War had faded from the headlines, he would still wake at night to the sound of engines. He'd hear the scream of the MiG in his dreams, the thunder of his own guns, the flash of fire in the valley. He'd wake in silence, heart pounding, the phantom echo of flight still lingering. He once told a journalist who found him in the 1970s, "I think I shot down a ghost that day, because I've been haunted ever since." The journalist wrote the article under the title, "The Last Dogfight." It ran in a small aviation magazine, and within months it spread like wildfire among veteran circles. Letters poured in. Pilots who had flown Mustangs, engineers who had built MiGs, historians who debated the physics. Could it really happen? Could the impossible be true? Some said no. They pointed to the raw numbers, the charts, the data. A MiG-15 was simply too fast, too advanced. The idea of a Mustang bringing it down was fantasy. Others said yes, and not because of science, but because of spirit. They said that sometimes, for reasons no equation can explain, history bends. Reed never confirmed or denied the story. When asked again, years later, he smiled faintly and said, maybe the Mustang wanted one last victory. In time, his story took on a life of its own. It was told in classrooms, in flight schools, in documentaries that mixed fact and legend until the two became indistinguishable. The impossible dogfight became more than a story. It became a symbol, a reminder that even when technology moves forward, there's something eternal about courage. Meanwhile, the world had changed. The jet age gave way to the space age. Men left the Earth itself, riding rockets that roared louder than any piston engine could dream. The P-51 became a museum piece. The MiG-15, an artifact of early Cold War ambition. And yet when veterans gathered, grey-haired, weathered, their eyes still sharp, they always came back to that question. Could a P-51 destroy a MiG-15? The answer didn't matter anymore. The question itself had become sacred, because in that question was everything they had lived for, the struggle, the fear, the thrill of being alive in a sky that wanted to kill you. The MiG was the future, sleek and ruthless. The Mustang was the past, noble and defiant. Together, they represented the moment humanity crossed from one world to another, from instinct to automation, from heart to circuitry. For Reed, the years that followed were quiet. He moved to a small town, built model planes in his garage, and taught young pilots at a local airfield. He never spoke of the war unless asked. When he did, his words were soft, deliberate. They tell you flying is about control, he would say. It's not. It's about surrender. You can't fight the sky. You dance with it. The day I faced that MiG, I stopped fighting. I just let go. And the Mustang carried me home. His students would listen in silence, not quite understanding. How could they? They lived in a world of autopilot and radar, of safety and simulation. But for a moment, they could almost see it. The cold Korean dawn, the screaming jet, the battered Mustang clawing at the sky, and they'd feel something stir inside them. That's what legends do. They make us feel. By the time Reed passed away, the story of his impossible duel had outgrown him. It had become folklore, a testament not just to aviation, but to the timeless battle between man and machine, between courage and inevitability. Historians still argue about it, tracing flight logs and mission records, searching for evidence. Some claim to have found fragments of MiG wreckage matching the time and place. Others dismiss it as coincidence, but no one can disprove it either. And maybe that's the point. The truth of the impossible dogfight doesn't live in reports or photographs. It lives in the imagination of everyone who ever looked up at the sky and dreamed of flying. It lives in that single heartbeat where the underdog refuses to give in, where an old plane defies time itself. Because every generation faces its own MiG, something faster, stronger, newer. And every generation needs its Mustang, a symbol that reminds us that willpower still matters. The legend of Captain Reed and his impossible fight became exactly that, a mirror for anyone who ever felt outmatched, outdated, or forgotten. It whispered, "You still matter. You can still fight." And maybe that's why the story refuses to die. Every time a P-51 roars to life at an airshow, people stop and listen. Children cover their ears, veterans wipe their eyes, and for a few minutes, the sound of the Merlin engine erases time. It's not just nostalgia, it's recognition. The old warhorse still flies, and in its roar, you can still hear the echo of that day over Korea. A single shot, a burst of fire, a jet falling through the clouds, and one man flying home through silence forever changed. Time has a way of polishing memory. The edges blur, the noise fades, but the essence, what truly mattered, remains. Decades after that morning in the Korean sky, the story of the P-51 and the MiG became something more than a military anecdote. It became a parable, a story not about machines or war, but about the human spirit facing obsolescence and daring to fight anyway. In museums across the world, the two aircraft sometimes sit only a few meters apart. The P-51 Mustang with its proud curved lines, painted nose art, and propeller blades standing still like a warrior at rest. The MiG-15, sleek, cold, efficient. Its swept wings frozen in perfect symmetry, the embodiment of the modern era that replaced everything before it. Tourists walk between them, cameras clicking, unaware that in those quiet exhibits lives the echo of something far greater, a battle not of weapons, but of wills. The curators write placards explaining specifications. They list horsepower, range, ceiling, armament, but they can't capture the one thing that made the P-51 immortal, its soul. That feeling of vibration through the controls, of the Merlin's growl beneath the pilot's boots, of the sky trembling under its presence. The Mustang wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And so was the man who flew it. Captain Thomas Reed died in the late 1980s, quietly in his sleep. The newspaper obituary was brief. Veteran pilot W2 in Korea, decorated for valor. Nothing about the MiG, nothing about the impossible fight. But at his funeral, a small crowd gathered. Family, old friends, former students. And as they lowered the flag over his casket, a sound broke the stillness. From the distance came the rumble of an engine, not a jet, but a piston. The unmistakable, spine-shaking roar of a Merlin. A restored P-51 flew overhead, low and slow, its shadow crossing the cemetery like a passing ghost. No one had arranged it. No one knew who was flying it. But every veteran there felt the same chill. It was as if the sky itself had come to pay its respects. After that, the legend refused to fade. Historians continued to debate it. Engineers ran simulations. Aviators argued in hangars and forums. Could a P-51 really destroy a MiG-15? The conclusions varied, but something deeper emerged. It didn't matter. What mattered was that someone believed it could, that someone tried, because every generation faces its own moment of obsolescence. The moment when the world moves on, faster and colder, leaving behind the people and machines that built it. And in that moment, the question isn't whether you can keep up, it's whether you'll keep fighting. That's why the story of the Mustang endures. It's not a story about victory. It's a story about defiance, about standing in the face of inevitability and saying, "Not yet." There's something poetic about the timing. The P-51 was born in an age when the pilot was king, when flying was touch, feel, intuition. The MiG-15 ushered in an age of data, thrust, and technology. One belonged to the heart, the other to the mind. The impossible dogfight between them wasn't just about performance. It was about the very definition of what it meant to be human in the age of machines. Perhaps that's why the legend resonates beyond aviation circles. Writers, artists, and dreamers see in it a reflection of every struggle where the old faces the new, where craftsmanship meets automation, where soul meets system. Because the truth is, we're all the Mustang sometimes, outdated, outnumbered, facing forces that move faster than we can comprehend. But like that old fighter, we still have something no machine can replicate: instinct, courage, and heart. In that sense, Captain Reed's impossible victory was never just his. It was ours. Every time a pilot climbs into a cockpit and feels the vibration of flight, every time someone dares to stand against impossible odds, the story repeats. The past whispers through the metal, through the air, through the pulse of engines. And maybe, somewhere beyond time, the Mustang and the MiG still chase each other through endless skies. Two phantoms locked in a dance neither can win or lose. The MiG climbs, the Mustang dives, the jet accelerates, the propeller howls. Over and over the duel continues, not for conquest but for memory. Because some battles are too beautiful to end. The legacy of the impossible dogfight isn't about who won. It's about the will to rise when the sky says you can't. It's about the belief that courage can still bend physics, that heart can still challenge progress, that even when time replaces everything, there are moments that refuse to fade. When people watch restored P-51s fly at airshows today, they feel it. The crowd goes quiet as the plane arcs through the sun, the engine echoing like a heartbeat from another age. For a few seconds, every person looking up understands something fundamental. Progress isn't about erasing the past, it's about remembering what made it worth building. The MiG-15 may have been faster, stronger, more advanced, but the Mustang, in its defiance, became eternal, and that is why the legend remains. Because the sky doesn't care who built you, it only respects who dares to fly. So, could a P-51 destroy a MiG-15? The answer depends on what you mean by destroy. In performance, no. In spirit, absolutely. Because on that cold morning in Korea, when an outdated fighter rose against the future, the Mustang proved that heart is the only weapon time can't defeat. And somewhere in the silence above us, the echo of that engine still hums. A reminder that impossibility is just another altitude to reach. For every dreamer, every fighter, every believer who has ever looked at a sky too high, too dangerous, too far, this story belongs to you. The legend of the Flying Mustang endures not because it won, but because it refused to die. And so long as someone, somewhere, looks up and dares to imagine the impossible, the dogfight will never truly be over.